Conspiracy theories are often corrosive, paranoid, and without evidence. Think the Rothschilds controlling the world or Novara Media being a Putin proxy. Are you watching, Paul Mason? Others, though, turn out to be true. Think the CIA plotting to kill Castro or the Telegraph controlling Boris Johnson. Well, it seems we now have a new theory we can put in that true pile. Chris Curtis is currently head of political polling at Opinion, but used to work at YouGov. Today, he posted a very revealing thread about YouGov's polling during the 2017 general election, which, you'll remember, saw Jeremy Corbyn finish just a few thousand votes short of entering Downing Street. Those were, of course, a few thousand votes that could have changed Britain forever. So, what has Curtis revealed about this high-stakes election? Well, he begins by quote tweeting Andrew Fisher, former head of policy under Corbyn. Fisher was highlighting that it was the 5-year anniversary of the 2017 election, and Chris Curtis writes, "My experience of the 2017 general election was probably a bit different from Andrew's. Firstly, it is worth noting just how dramatically the opinion polls changed during the course of the campaign. This isn't how things are supposed to happen." Now, Curtis goes on to explain how the increase in Labour's polling was very dramatic and also very surprising for a pollster to see. They were all stunned by it and tentative about the results they were seeing and publishing. Now, that's fair enough. They surprised everyone. This wasn't a normal election. And you can see why a pollster might want to double check those results before they put them out. But Curtis also highlights there was political pressure from above to suppress evidence of Labour's advance. The first example he goes into involves an MRP poll released on the 31st of May. This was a new method which projected who would win seats based on the demographics of the people who lived in those constituencies and how, in those demographics, people were responding to questions from pollsters. Now, you might remember that poll because it was big news. The Times splashed it on their front page, of course, alongside a story about Corbyn and anti-Semitism. If you remember the mood at the time, you'll also remember that poll results like this weren't supposed to happen. Labour under Corbyn was supposed to be a hopeless lost cause, not a potential government in waiting. And we already knew that YouGov did receive pushback from powerful people after the publication of that MRP poll. This is an excerpt from Tim Shipman's 2017 book, Fallout, about what happened after the poll was published. So Shipman writes, Nadeem Zahawi phoned Stefan Shakespeare, YouGov's chief executive, and said, quote, "They'll be queuing up to shut you down if you're wrong on this. You've just moved the currency by 1.5%. I'm going to spare you the agony. I'm going to call for your resignation when you're wrong." Nadeem Zahawi plays a key role in this story. You'll probably know him as the current Education Secretary, but back in 2017, he was a backbencher working in Theresa May's policy unit. And perhaps even more significantly, he was the co-founder of YouGov. Stefan Shakespeare is the other co-founder who Zahawi was threatening in that call. Shipman also wrote that during the election, YouGov bosses were told that Crosby was going around saying, quote, "I put Populous out of business last time. I'm going to put YouGov out of business this time." Now, Crosby was Theresa May's campaign manager. As I say, those quotes we just gave you, they have all been in the public domain since Tim Shipman published his book towards the end of 2017. But now Curtis, this is the guy who was working for YouGov, has revealed something even more significant. It appears that YouGov buckled under the pressure. So he writes that as a result of the widespread push back, our polling and coverage was a lot worse for the rest of the campaign. We did a fantastic debate bowl in the hours following the debate that Corbyn took part in. The results were stark. Corbyn won by a country mile, and 1 in 4 Tory voters thought he was best. So 1 in 4 Tory voters thought he was best. He goes on to say, but despite having written the story and designed the chants, we were banned from releasing the story because it was too positive about Labour. So a leading polling company, probably the leading polling company, refused to publish the results of polling which put Corbyn in the lead in the debate, so he won the debate, after the Tories threatened to destroy them. Now that sounds pretty fishy. Let's go on though. He also said, similarly, there were a few, quote, minor methodology changes for the final poll, which increased the Tory lead. This was done after pressure from high-ups, and this seems very important, and despite protests from those of us who thought it wasn't okay. So he's saying the people who were working with the data, they thought, Labour were catching up with the Conservatives. Their bosses, for whatever reason, maybe it was those calls from Nadeem Zahawi, maybe it was just that they thought, these polls look too different from everyone else's. Whatever reason, they pressured people below them to change the algorithms. Now, this is extraordinary. A Tory MP and the party's campaign manager, that's Crosby, threatened a private company in order to mislead the public about Corbyn's successes, and it seems it resulted in them suppressing information that would have put him in the lead. It's also worth noting that after the election, Zahawi was very quickly promoted to a ministerial job. He became a minister in the business department 6 months into Theresa May's new administration. James, you were working for Labour during that campaign. How surprised are you by the revelations in Chris Curtis's thread?
Sadly, not at all. I suppose it's polling's always something of a dark art. It's always something that is, you're trying to grab around for what might be the truth about what might happen in the future. What they had with the MRP poll that he's talking about there is this really impressive, actually, it's a really clever way of trying to forecast what will happen, which they released the first time. And it was the first time I remember the front page of the Times. I remember taking it around to everyone, pointing at this and saying, this is what the future looks like. This is what we should all be doing in the future, do more MRP polls. And also, this is, if you look at the results they got in that, it very closely matches the results of the general election. But it was the first really clear evidence that we had that what you saw in the campaign, which was just huge numbers, growing numbers, turning out to campaign for Jeremy Corbyn, turning up to the meetings. There was this real sort of sense of momentum, small m, about that campaign, was being confirmed by what you saw on the ground. And this was ahead of what the more conventional polling methods were telling you. So it was a key moment, I thought, for us on the campaign side to sort of see that what we knew or suspected was happening because the campaign was going well was turning into a kind of political reality that we actually saw delivered in 2017. But what you also get with polls is that this problem, not even necessarily the sort of direct manipulation, but this problem of a kind of groupthink, that there's a strong incentive for any individual pollster to not step out of line with what everyone else is saying. The risks on the downside of you saying something that seems out of line and then it being wrong and your reputation is trashed are much bigger than the potential upside of getting something spectacularly right. I mean, the MRP poll was pretty spectacularly right. There was a couple, I think, Survation on a conventional polling method also called the election very early on, and they were mocked. So people might have seen it's quite funny, the footage of Andrew Neil and various other people mocking this poor guy from Survation who's defending his method. The guy from Survation was completely correct, but there's a real incentive amongst polling companies to just be very conservative. At the time in 2017, that was exactly as you say. The common sense was there was no way Labour could win. There was with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, therefore this can't be happening. So it's almost common sense. I mean, this is how ideology works in the end. It's not like there's necessarily a conspiracy for everyone to kind of think the same. It's just that everybody sort of knows what's going to happen because everybody like them thinks the same thing. The really cutting bit on what Chris said was this potential for direct political pressure, which is over and above that ideology, that common sense, that shared view of the world everybody has, that polling companies reinforce. That, I think, is a bit more of a smoking gun here. And it's not unreasonable for people to ask questions about what exactly was said and whether pressure was really applied to YouGov in this fairly direct way. I mean, it was kind of a truth waiting to be found, if you like. It was sitting there in Tim Shipman's book, but I think Chris has added a bit more detail to that.
I suppose why I introduced this with the idea of conspiracy theories is because it has been a long-running theme that when YouGov release polls, there is a corner on the internet which is saying this is a Tory front organisation. Don't believe what they say. And the reason they say that is because it was co-founded by Nadeem Zahawi, who at that point was a backbench MP, now is in cabinet. And so people say, well, presumably, if it was co-founded by a Conservative, then it's only going to put out results which are favourable to the Conservatives. Now, this has usually been dismissed as a conspiracy theory. I'm sure, in that crude sense, it probably is. I don't think YouGov only published stuff which is favouring the Conservatives. But it does seem like there was something to it. Nadeem Zahawi did call up the other co-founder, who at that point was the CEO of the organisation. And, by any account, Nadeem Zahawi says it was a joke. But I mean, it sounds like some pressure was applied. And for whatever reason, as Chris Curtis has revealed, pressure was, put down the organisation so that methods were changed and methods were changed that didn't reveal the full extent of the popularity of Jeremy Corbyn, and especially that people perceived that he had won the debate. And obviously those debates were a lot about momentum. So that does seem significant. YouGov have since responded to Chris Curtis's thread. So they released this statement. Chris Curtis's allegation that we suppressed a poll because the results were too positive about Labour is incorrect. There was a poll run by Chris following the debate in Cambridge on the 31st of May. When reviewed by others in the YouGov political team, it was clear that the sample of people who watched the debate significantly overrepresented Labour voters from the previous election. We take our responsibilities as a research organisation seriously, and we could not have published a poll from a skewed sample that favoured any party. Now, Chris Curtis has responded. So he responded with a full thread. We'll just read you a couple of the tweets from it. So he said, on the methodology of the poll, it was done using the standard YouGov methodology that they use all the time. I'm almost certain it is exactly the same way as we ran this other debate poll, which nobody had any problem with us publishing. So he said, this is a normal methodology. It seems pretty odd that they pulled this one. He also said, even if Labour were overrepresented, it would have been weighted to sort that out. He goes on to say, either way, the most important finding of the poll, the one I wanted to focus on and thought was most important, was that a good chunk of Tory voters thought Corbyn had won. This is rare in a debate poll where results normally fall down party lines. And I think this is crucial. He says, this is a big story that I feel went untold, and which is why I mention it in my thread. So there was what a pollster thought was a very relevant piece of information that would have been useful for, the electorate to know. But they were just a lowly data scientist, and the person high above them who happened to be, the CEO happened to be very close to a Conservative MP who co-founded the organisation. The people at the top of the organisation were saying, don't publish this. It poses some pretty significant questions. And as I say, as I started this section by pointing out, given that election was so close and given the results of it were so significant, even if someone is to argue, well, look, is a poll that shows Labour closer to the Conservatives or Jeremy Corbyn winning a TV debate, is that really going to be critical in an election? Like, how many people is that going to persuade? Well, probably not many. But if Labour with a few more thousand votes could potentially have formed a government, then you don't have to influence that many people. You don't have to swing that many votes for it to have a massive difference in that election result. And as I say, in the entire history of this country. So it seems fairly significant to me. And I think people will be fairly suspicious of particularly YouGov in this instance. I think there are questions to answer. Obviously, I'm not saying that means everything they ever put out you should reject, but this definitely has confirmed some suspicions, hasn't it? You can't really escape that. All of us here at Novara Media are working harder than ever to keep scrutinising establishment politicians and the media barons who protect them. We don't have billionaire funders. We don't have advertising partnerships. We're funded entirely by you. If you've ever thought about supporting us, now's the time to go to novaramedia.com/support and donate anything you can from just £1 per month. Defy the corporate media. Join our monthly supporters and help build our supporter base to 10,000 strong.